Hello, everyone. I'm LeiLani Cauthen, the CEO of the Learning Council and proud Edujedi Grandmaster for the Edujedi Leadership Society. We've been going through a series of events talking about definitions of digital curriculum terms, the new Edujedi instructional design theory, and now we're on to the learning experience standards, which are a different set of standards. They're really responsibilities. And we're going to start today with a discussion around the administrative level of responsibilities aimed in particular at leading your knowledge inventory in the digital universe, which is a huge topic. There's no way we're going to get it all done today, but I have with us today Dr. Don Phipps, who's the superintendent from Caldwell County Schools. Hi, Don. I'm going to come back to you to give some flavor about what's happening for you. And then also we're expecting Jeramie Davis, Jeramie and Lindsey Hallett. Hi, both of you guys are there. Okay. All right. So Jeramie's the district coordinator of blended learning at Blue Valley School District, and Lindsey is the district coordinator of blended learning for Blue Valley as well. Looks like you guys are together, so you can pipe up at will. And then there's Jarrett, who's the digital learning coordinator for Kansas City Public. So we're really glad to have all of you. And we also have coming in from the commercial grade side for parts of the discussion is Dr. Wendy Oliver, who's the Chief Learning Officer from Edison Learning, and Zach Simon, who's the Assistant Director of Instruction and Advisement from Edison Learning, so that they can do some show and tell along the way. Wendy, do you want to give us a little brief overview of who you guys are too, so everyone knows?
Sure. Hey, everybody. LeiLani, thank you so much for allowing us to participate in today's discussion. These are always awesome discussions, and I learned so much. On the commercial side, Edison Learning has been around for almost 3 decades, and we have digital content for grades 6 through 12 that we partner with school districts to offer. We also have a staff of teachers who are certified in multiple states, where we partner with districts when they need us to bring in some teachers to help support what they want to offer to students. And we're going to show, hopefully, some examples that'll help you visualize some of the things that we're going to discuss today. I think sometimes it's so helpful when you have a visual to help see some of the things that we're talking about. We have over 150 courses. Some of them are project-based. Some of them are even credit recovery. We just been in the industry for so long that we have a lot of different things to offer to meet some needs. So with that, I'll stop talking because I know we have a lot to cover today and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I know you'll share some more screens. This is parts of your system I'm flashing by right now. But let's go back to Dr. Don Phipps and have him give a little intro about what's happening for him out in Caldwell County.
Thank you. We are in North Carolina. We're in week 3 of school. We're dealing with mask debate in our communities as whether or not students should be masked or not with respect to COVID. And we're currently wearing masks, and we're dealing with the quarantine numbers and the positive numbers that are coming in. And we've rolled out a virtual academy, which is much different than what we had in place last year. But I look forward to this conversation, sharing some of the things that we're doing, but more importantly, from my perspective, to pick up tips from some of the others on this session, so I have a chance to learn from other folks.
Oh, perfect. Well, great. Okay, good to have you. And then Jeramie Davis, why don't you go next?
Jeramie Davis, we have blended learning coordinator for Blue Valley Schools in Overland Park, Kansas.
Lindsey, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, nice to be here. My name is Lindsey Hallett, and like Jeramie, I am a blended learning coordinator for the Blue Valley School District. I was a former elementary school teacher and then an instructional coach. And this is my 2nd year in this position, supporting K-12. And with Jeramie on board, he's more the secondary focus, and I'm the elementary focus.
Oh, perfect. So you guys are a team. All right, good. Well, we're looking forward to your comments. All right, so Jarrett, you want to give a little intro?
Yeah, I'm Jarrett. The computer does not recognize my camera at the moment. And I am the digital learning coordinator for Kansas City Public Schools. At this point, I'm taking care of K-12. So all buildings fall under me. We've been in school for a few weeks, changed our SIS and whatnot, so getting over those hiccups. But everything's going pretty smoothly other than that so far. So happy to have all the kids back and having a good start to the school year.
Great. Okay, good. All right. So here's what we're talking about today. So if you're familiar with the Edujedi Dictionary, it actually started in the administrative experience standards with this introduction. Not going to read it out to you, but it boils down to the operative term of responsibilities now that you're in the digital world. And let's talk about those. So I'm going to pull up the document that's actually in the dictionary so we can look at it. So it starts with your responsibilities, and we're going to focus on your digital inventory responsibilities today, about half these standards. It gives you the definition of knowledge object. You know, it's going to be a discrete little piece scanned in from some old textbook or a little widgety something or other, or PDF some teacher pulls in or takes off of some site somewhere, a link to some site. Or it could be a whole piece of knowledge, like actual full courseware, like Edison does, a lot of other companies do, maybe not attached to services like Edison has, but it's, you know, something you buy and put in your whole inventory, and then you've got maybe also your learning management systems, or you're using Google Class or Microsoft, and then you've got your student information system. You've got like this ecosystem in most districts now. The biggest one we know of is in Houston ISD, which has over 2 million digital learning objects. It's quite a bucking bronco to ride in terms of the sheer scale of it. So the first responsibility standard here is that you're actually conducting a routine inventory of your knowledge objects. And the reason for that, obviously, manyfold: security, you know, not keeping on buying the same thing that's going to do the same thing as something else, but standardizing, so maybe you can get data out of it and all those kinds of considerations. So let's start with that. I'm going to go reverse order of who we have on the team here, and come to Joe first. Joe, what are your comments on conducting routine inventory so that you know what you have?
So that is, I mean, definitely something we are working on. On the IT side, you know, they like to talk about how many applications we have running at any given moment. That's something we've been trying to pare down the last few years. Definitely come up with some standard operating procedures on how those come into being. You know, does a teacher have access to use whatever they want? Is it all going to be, you know, district mandated? Are we going to have a menu set up? So we're in that process, but it's definitely something we need to do. I mean, it turns into one of those deals where it's almost, if you have too many, yeah, you might as well have none, because it's, you know, what do I use for my quizzing? What do I use for my formative assessment? What am I going to use for my presentations? So something that's necessary, but we're still kind of in the process of finding out how exactly that looks at the end of the day. You know, trying to balance, you know, teacher choice with just being good stewards of our technology.
Yeah, and that is the crux of the issue, right? Teachers want to use what they want to use. But we have heard a lot of districts talk about trying to normalize their inventory so that they at least can get some predictive analysis, some continuity of operation. Because if every sixth grade teacher uses a different math game, you don't know if it's the game that's the problem, if there's a lack of learning, if it's the teacher, or what's going on. So there's that question that's behind that inventory issue. Okay, so now coming to Lindsey and Jeramie. So what are your thoughts on this inventory issue?
I think it's definitely something we need in our district. I know we're looking at different platforms that could potentially do this for us, but we're in a district that's rather large, and we have a lot of digital tools that are available to our teachers. And being the people that support the teachers with these digital tools, it is hard to support them and give them the support that they really need to implement them successfully with students when there are so many. We can't possibly be familiar with every single tool. So if we had a more narrowed focus on the digital tools and how to best utilize them in the classroom, I think we would be better off. Any thoughts, Jeramie?
One thing I really want to add to that is something that's changed because of our, you know, our landscape and environment the last couple of years is we're kind of going through a review of our curriculum items, our resources, our textbooks, and if they don't have a digital component, then they're thrown out. So we're really looking for those pieces when we're dealing with vendors and things that can give us usage data, so we can actually see, like you said, we're all using the same game. So is it really the resource, or is it something different? So that's kind of how we've had to change a little bit here in the last couple of years.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. So, Dr. Phipps, what are your thoughts in this area?
And when I read that, I think about the responsibility and the outcomes of telling a teacher who's been in a classroom for 25 years that they've got to change classrooms, and you think about all the things that have been accumulated. And we're looking at that from an app and program perspective, because we can't continue to spend and spend on so many that there's almost a program evaluation responsibility that we have for an application or a program to determine whether or not we're getting any bang for the buck. But then you talk about individual things that teachers do. And you're right, if they're effective, is it because of the teacher? Is it because of the tool? Is it a combination? So we're trying to work through that now, even having teachers keep up with their own inventories. There was an interesting bill introduced in the North Carolina General Assembly this summer that was going to require every teacher to have to publicly display every resource that they use in the classroom. If it was a song, the lyrics that were there, if it was a video clip, there would have been millions and millions of things that had to be put together. That has not come to fruition yet, but we're beginning to have that conversation. And once we saw that bill introduced, the idea was how big of a job this is going to be to try to pull all that together. And are we even aware of all the resources and the documents and the apps and the programs and those kinds of things? So we're trying to take a bite at a time to deal with that. It's easier for us to look at the system-wide applications and things that we're spending money for, but we also have to consider those things that teachers have gotten off, download, or they've shared with one another, or they found something out somewhere that they're using. We want to make sure that we're aware of what those things are. It's a huge task.
Yeah, this inventory issue is also, the inventory of what you have is probably also in the digital world an ever-changing mosaic. Because let's say one of your teachers has a link to something that's a free online, like NASA has free online resources, right? Just for one example. And something on that website over there at NASA changes, so the link now doesn't work. So the next time the teacher goes to teach that particular lesson that they have all planned out, there's a time-consuming thing for them to actually try to find where that thing is now, and if it doesn't exist at all, get a replacement in the middle of trying to run a lesson. So yeah, the inventory issue, if you had to display it, would be an insurmountable task, especially if you own something that has commercial side username password access. Like maybe you bought something from Edison or one of the many courseware companies. They're not going to be willing to let anybody go into their system. You'd have to screenshot everything and then put it publicly, which would be ridiculous, right? Like that would take a year. So I understand where you're at right now, but that inventory issue, the reason it's becoming so important is because, like your state government's trying to do right now, people want to know. It's their kid, right? They want to know what you're doing. So that's just one of the reasons. Let's go on to this next one. So you have a process in place for your selection. Sometimes this is let happen only at the teacher level. Sometimes it's centralized. So I'm going to go reverse order again and come back to you, Dr. Phipps. What kind of process do you have now for selecting some of your software?
I feel like we've clamped down on this better. I think we're doing more of this in terms of having a process in place where whether it's a teacher or an administrator communicates with technology about what it is that they want to bring in and use, and then we determine whether or not it can work with our system, and then also some review of whatever that tool or resource happens to be, and then having some scrutiny after we implement it to determine whether or not we had the kind of result that we expected. But we've had that in place for some time for devices. If a person were buying a document camera, if they were bringing in a new printer, there were reasons why we couldn't let it work on our network, or maybe we could. But we're doing the same thing now for the education, the intellectual property of things like primary source documents, or things that they've scanned in and brought in, or they've gotten them from just a variety of places. We have to have that same type of scrutiny in place to make sure that, number one, it'll work, it won't create problems for us, but also that we've got some inventory so that we can catalog what's being used.
Yeah, and that's a whole workflow issue. Teacher finds something, it goes up to somebody else, and they have to scrutinize it, and they come back, and yeah, that's a whole thing. Well,
Well, then
good.
the teacher's
Okay.
ready to use it, and you've got that delay, the process that you have to go through, and the teacher's on to another unit and has missed that opportunity. So it's very labor intensive. There's no question about it.
I agree. So before I go on to Lindsey and Jeramie, I want to wrap Wendy back in here. Wendy, what are your thoughts from the professional grade side on this, how people select their software and knowledge objects?
Well, my first thought is Dr. Phipps. I love to hear somebody else with a similar accent on a national panel. That doesn't happen that often. But yeah, I have to tell you, I think things got a little messy over the last year because there were so many providers that, with good intention, gave free access to so much software to teachers. And, the teachers with the best of intentions wanted interactive resources for their students during the pandemic. And the one thing that we tend to forget is free is never free, right? And so that means that data was being given away. And so I think there is such an opportunity to educate and for professional development for teachers to understand that free resources means that data is currency. So that's why it's always valuable to go through the professional grade side and to pay for software as a service. And so that's why that process needs to be in place to go through the district and to use software that is being provided by the district. I will say, even as commercial grade with teachers on staff that we train and we work very diligently with, we have a process where if a teacher finds a resource that he or she wants to use in their online classroom, they have to go through that process. And it's even difficult for us not to be a bottleneck, which is what we don't want to do either. And if a teacher finds something late at night and, oh, I want to use this the next day, it is difficult, even on the commercial side. And I'm not dealing with a district with multiple buildings and teachers. And so I don't know the answer there, other than to say, okay, we've provided you with all these resources to meet these needs. This is software as a service that we even subcontract so that we can meet those interactive needs if it's not something that we've built. So I think the face of education is changing, and that's why it's important to work with those commercial grade software providers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that insight. All right, so let's go next to Jeramie or Lindsey.
We have a very similar process like Dr. Phipps talked about, and it's very tedious. And I would say maybe half of our teachers are really aware of that process. And so, as soon as they see that sign in with Google for their students or for themselves, they think it's okay and safe to use with students. And so we spend a lot of time looking at different apps and software requests that come in and trying to make sure that they're safe for student use. And the ultimate goal is to say, okay, we have something in place already that can do ultimately the same thing. And so rather than approving a new tool, we try to replace it with something that's already approved because our list is already very, very long. But like last year when there were all these new shiny tools and we were in survival mode, we did approve quite a bit just so teachers had everything at their fingertips that they could possibly need.
Yeah, I understand that position. Okay, Jeramie, do you have comments in this area too?
So I actually just moved over to Blue Valley from Kansas City. So Joe Jarrett was my old teammate. So I'll let him talk about Kansas City's process there, but it sounds like we're all on the same page and we're kind of across the panel here of having some sort of process. It seems like, though, kind of a common thing is how to communicate that with teachers, how to make it not bottleneck where there's, people are planning ahead of time, how to make sure they know what's available, what does it do. So that's kind of our struggle on that piece.
Okay. All right. So Joe, what's your process?
Well, it is in its current iteration, it's kind of a three-headed monster. So I am on the academic side, but separate from curriculum instruction technically, and then IT is in their own department as well. So the three of us all look at it. So I'm digital learning, we play, or at this point I play the gatekeeper for all those requests. I check for redundancy, overall usefulness. Does it actually serve some sort of purpose with our students and for our teachers if necessary? From there, we have to get a content blessing as well. So, they have their ELA resources or math resources. We don't want those to be a competitor to those. So if a teacher's requesting something that, doesn't line up with our ELA or math resources, then that's an automatic no. And then if it gets through all of that, it then goes on to IT, and IT does the final check, which should only be for privacy, security, FERPA, COPPA, all of that. It used to be that was a teacher request system, but those requests just kind of kept on coming all the time, never stopped. So now we've changed it to where it has to come from administration, so building level principals, vice principals, whomever. If teachers want something, it has to go through them, then that goes through us. And at that point, most of those are actually approved as opposed to just random things teachers are after.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing also is maybe the biggest stickler point is when it goes through the IT side for security.
Yeah, and usually, the good news there is after it's got that many, hands and or eyes on it, if it's just some fly-by-night company that nobody's heard of before, it usually doesn't make it that far down the process. There's very few times where privacy and security are legitimate issues, but they do have that final say on that. And then obviously, they can veto no matter what we say. If it's not up to their standards, then we can't roll forward with it. Nor would we want to, though.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I'll tell you, when we look at this issue of inventory, I'm going to go move on to the item number 3 here on the experience standards, the construction of a model, right? Like actually having a grasp of your ecosystem of things. If you look across things, you've maybe sort of created a graphic, like here's my student information systems, here's what I'm doing with word processing or the document level, and then here's what I'm doing for my learning management system. If I don't have one of those, here's what I'm doing with Google. What do I have for analytics? And then where are my integration points, or even my single sign-on? And then below that stack is all of your content, right? So you have framework systems first. The integrations point is starting to be a real stickler for the advanced districts because they want to see data. And a lot of the standalone apps, the little applet things, they don't integrate anywhere. They might stand behind your single sign-on so that the little kids only have one password, but they don't have a data feed of what's going on inside themselves back to anybody. So let's talk about that next. Like, how important is data to you, and what are you feeling about the burgeoning need for more data out of all this stuff? I'm coming back to you, Dr. Phipps.
I think, we've had a wealth of data, but we haven't known what to do with it, whether that's student test data or whatever. We're looking at teacher effectiveness and things like that. The data is useless unless it has some value to be integrated and applied in some way. And I think if, when we look at whatever resource we're talking about, whether it's an application or a file that a teacher brings in, I think the question is, how do we know that it's been effective? And what are the outcomes that were desired, and what do they look like? And at some point, there has to be some truing up of the time that was invested and the outcome that was received. And I think too often we forget about that part. We run out of time. We're too worried about planning the next day that we don't go back and reassess what we found out. But those are some of the informal types of data that need to be collected that I don't think we do a good job with.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the picture I got as you were saying that is that what's usually missing is sort of a chain of custody of data. We took this test, but what was the test a result of? What did they use for resources? What did the teacher do? What was the practice? And then here's the outcome. And so that you actually have what was the input to give the outcome? Because then you could do real-time application of the outcome. So that's the second thing that you talked about. What you're looking for is more informal, real-time application. And that is missing if you have too many resources and sort of a mosaic of confusion, because now you don't know why little Johnny's flunking math or little Rebecca. You just know she's flunking. So am I getting that a little bit straight?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to let's go Joe Jarrett next. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, kind of similar. I mean, the same thing when we have so many competing products, and most, these days have some parity. So just about everything, especially if you're going to buy it on the district level, is going to have some kind of assessment tool within it. But then we have our separate diagnostic tools, and we have our separate interim assessment tools, just finding out which data points we want to look at. I mean, if your entire instruction is housed within whatever content specific resource, but then we're farming out the assessment of what students are learning primarily through that resource to another resource, but then we're diagnosing where they're going to end up being on state testing through that third resource. It does become a bit much, especially for teachers when we say we want everything to be data focused. Well, what data are you looking at? When are we actually going to be able to apply that data? Because it also gets to a point of we're always just seeking more and more data. I mean, if our issue is trying to shoehorn in another assessment window, well, when are they actually going to use this data for anything other than assessing the data that we already have? So it does come a bit redundant. That's why it would be nice to find some more resources that are kind of just all inclusive without having to jump from point A to point B to point C, but we're not there yet.
I understand. All right, so let's go to Lindsey and Jeramie. Jeramie, why don't you go first this time?
Working? Okay, sorry. We had a small slight emergency.
I had to step away. I'm back.
We apologize. So I'll kind of go a little bit one off on this. Is I think data has kind of become, that dirty word in education, like so many things has. So Lindsey and I are kind of starting over, like a phase 0 of, we assume teachers know how to look at data. We assume that they know what that means and how to plan instruction. But as we've talked to teachers, we really have learned that's not the case. So our focus, even from a blended learning tech integration standpoint, is if we use tools or push tools for data collection, we also have to provide PL or PD for teachers on what that data means, how to use it, and how to plan the instruction. Otherwise, we have all these tools collecting data that's just sitting there that we might report out to the state or the district might use, but the district doesn't share with anybody. So that's kind of our focus, is taking it all the way down to the teacher level. And then hopefully a push of ours, which some other districts might have the jump on us on that, is getting students to also own their data and understand what their data means from some of those tools, that they can track it themselves. A lot of diagnostic tools or tools that adapt to where the student's case is, but really what does that mean for the student as well as the teacher in the classroom. So
good comments. Thank you for that. Okay, Lindsey.
I think that's a great point about the student utilizing that data as well. And I think just from my elementary lens, that's not something we do often or we do well. And as we're refocusing on data and what data to use and how to use the data, it's really starting in our schools within their professional learning communities. And in our district, we're really trying to have a hard reset on those, because in the last probably 5 years in our district, our PLCs have really grown to be just a planning period, which we know is also necessary, but we've gotten away from common assessments and looking at that data to help drive our instruction. So we know that teachers need help finding the digital tools to collect that data. But before that, they even need to be able to have that open space to have those conversations with their team about the data and what's happening in their classroom and what students know and don't know.
All right, so Wendy, what are your comments on this from the commercial side?
Well, I'll start off by saying that 15 years ago, when I started the State of Tennessee's online learning program, it fell under the Division of Assessment, which sounded kind of wonky at that time, but it was really a political move. But in reality, it was brilliant, because data and digital learning go together. And so that we're really seeing that now, because you get all of that data out of digital learning commercial grade programs. And so they're really providing lots of tools for teachers to use, and then they apply that data. Or in the commercial grade, you have all of that data that's driving the personalized learning through artificial intelligence. And that's really helping those teachers so that they can facilitate a lot of those reteaching models that are coming through. And from the teacher side, I know Zach can tell a lot of what he's been doing this year to really work with our teachers to, just like everyone else is saying, to apply that data as they're looking at it. You know, that's the key, is to interpret, to analyze, and to apply. And we're seeing that across the board. But fortunately, in the commercial grade, the systems do the work of actually adjusting the content in the systems so that students' needs are personalized.
And so that's a perfect dovetail into what we want to do next, which is the next standard. Some of these I'm going to squish together and not really have us talk too much about. But what you just said about personalized learning, what Lindsey talked about with their PLCs, as Learning Council research, our big national study, and all the conversations we're having with superintendents and other leaders across the nation, we're hearing that during the pandemic, there was a sea change in student agency expectations. Parents got involved more than ever before. Grandparents and parents started shopping for online apps at a scale of increase of spend like we've never seen in the commercial markets. A median of 5 million students left public education for any alternative, the biggest growth area obviously being homeschooling. So this thing, student agency, and this next standard, which ends with the word goals. Lindsey, like you were saying, students being co-responsible is the new it thing. They're aware of their own goals and they're help driving their own navigation digitally in many instances. So let's talk about the harnessing of student agency as a responsibility of leadership now, as the underlying thing in this number 4 responsibility. So I want to come back to Dr. Phipps. You go first. Let's talk about harnessing that.
Oh, I would say I put a circle around number 4 as being one of the areas that we want to do a better job with. I think not that we've done a poor job, it just hasn't been an area of focus, but it has become an area of focus, I think, on a nationwide level. And when we talk about personalized and the focus on a child, certainly during the pandemic, we've realized that there are more needs than just academic needs for a child that have to be met to be able to teach a child. But really, when we say we're handing over some of that authority and that responsibility and the ability for a child to have a voice in their own learning and setting goals and standards, do we really mean that, or is it just something that we're putting on paper? In our district, we're currently redoing our strategic plan. We have our reaccreditation visit coming up in January. This is an area of focus that I'm really interested in because I know we want to say it, but I want to make sure that we're doing it. And how do you make that happen? And I would say, as a district, we're just at the starting line for this. I've seen data notebooks that students have. I like to have students host their own parent conferences and be able to talk about the things that they've done in the classroom, which truly gives you an idea whether or not a student understands what they did and why they did it, and then how that fits into the big picture of learning. But this is an area that's a huge undertaking for us, but we're determined that we're going to do a great job of this because our students deserve it. And we want to do this as a build our own and not something that we go out and purchase off the shelf. We feel like it needs to be specific to the needs in our county and the needs of our students and to the skill set of our students and teachers. And I'm excited to see what comes out of this, but we're just beginning this work.
This is a heavy lift because after 200 years of institutionalized whole group top-down teaching, to blend in a lot more student agency and require it, even the students, the older ones particularly, aren't ready. They're like, what? I got to be in charge of myself now? I've never been in charge of myself, So it's a moment, right? But there's been a lot of wins too from the pandemic where that emerged, right? Out of desperation, there was an emergence of agency. When we should use that. So thank you so much, Dr. Phipps. All right, so I'm coming next to just shake up the order here. Joe Jarrett, what are your thoughts here?
I'd say, if Dr. Phipps's district is at the starting line, we are walking to the starting line still, but I think we've gotten a lot closer just based on that last year and a half. where students were, completing work asynchronously. They were kind of choosing their own things. Teachers were incorporating some more student choice into their lives. I think that's got us kind of on the start. And then we have been putting a focus, even though a very, very loose focus, on students, just being aware of their own data. So where they're at, again, going back to those diagnostics. And then are they meeting their goals for, getting their online instruction completed? Do they know their reading level, those sorts of things? So I think we've got some of those ingredients there, but I mean, we are still a distance from being able to apply those in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah. Yeah, the professional grade stuff does that. I mean, it's really sort of, remember the little gold stars on the little boards that teachers would put together in primary? It's like, I've got more gold stars than this kid and da-da-da. This student agency thing is not new. It's just on steroids and digital. It's exciting. So I'm glad you guys are both thinking about it. Let's go over to Jeramie and Lindsey. Which one do you guys want to go first?
I'll go first. Jeremy's taking notes over here, so he has some good things to say. I'll start though. I think when you think of students kind of taking control of their learning and having those personalized learning plans and really understanding what their goals and their outcomes are, I think it actually starts with the teacher. It starts with the teacher being able to give up some of that control, which is really hard, and really setting and creating that culture in their classroom where students can fail forward and grow together. I think it really starts with the teacher understanding the work that needs to be in place before just turning students loose.
I agree. Guardrails are essential.
Yes.
Use of the open internet maybe is not a good idea in some cases. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, Jeramie.
So I think one thing I want to add is that's really, really hard to do at scale.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard with everything else going on in the world, all of our strategic plans, to say, hey, we're going to ask you to do this. So what Lindsey and I are going to do, because our district does have a focus on blended learning and it is in our strategic plan, is we're going to start some cohorts this year, starting sometime in October. We're going to do, I think, two. One is going to be blended learning fundamentals almost, and how to do station rotation, and eventually how to get some of that student choice and agency built in with some PBL activities as like the end goal. But for our teachers that have been doing it for a while, because we have had blended learning around for about 5 years or so, is to really do a cohort around PBL. We've had the Buck Institute come in for a few years, kind of do some PD, but some of those things, you have so many initiatives happening, it's hard to support all of them. So we've learned, kind of to pull back a little bit and find out what's really important to us and how we want to reimagine education. So those are just ways we're going to try to start this work of student agency and start that idea and start it small, and then work with our instructional coaches to kind of grow it grassroots, kind of top down, but in a very small way.
I got it. Yeah, this is the really big point of reimagination of education, is this, how do we personalize? So I want to ask Zach. Zach, I know you've been in the background here, but I want you to get ready and take over the screen, because I think you can show us the depth of student agency in commercial grade systems now, and then you can show us point number 6 here, the knowledge object accessibility. So why don't, Doug, why don't you pass him the screen so he can show and tell on that? In the meantime, what I just want to say is everything you guys are looking at in terms of trying to move in that personalized way and express student agency has this outside pressure from the commercial world. The commercial world is gamifying, allowing you to play math things at the level that you get repetitively before you're allowed to the next level of the game, right? Like, it's doing a personalized algorithmic automation in many subjects now. And that's truly the outside pressure you're competing with, is what could be done to really personalize learning. So let's just show that a little bit. Okay, so for all of our other listeners, and later after this recording goes out and 10,000 people watch it, Zach, go ahead and show what's in commercial grade.
Yeah, so this is our system. This is kind of like the jumping off point for students. This would be all of the courses that they'd be aligned to. You can see some of the student data that displays to them. I know that was part of our conversation today. You can see the pacing. And I'm going to show you this economics. This is a project-based course as well. And it will have a project baked into the entire course. And so what you see here is all of our lessons, our objectives are aligned to state standards depending on specific state standards that are aligned to. This is obviously a social studies course, so there might be some regional standards that would need to be aligned to. And so you can see here from the commercial grade side, this student, it's a demo student, has completed 3 lessons, and they can't move on into lesson 4 or any lessons further. It kind of releases as the student completes the lessons, so they can't jump ahead. But some of the things I like to point out
Sometimes
here,
teachers set, right, Zach? So
yeah,
sometimes-
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And teachers can kind of be that gatekeeper. I think someone mentioned guardrails. They can put up those guardrails for students to make sure that they're heading down the right path. And we still have gold stars. If you see them here, we have 3 stars here, 2 stars there. And we tell the students what those stars mean, and they just get those little boosts when they do well and they complete all of the learning objects. And so if I go into at the lesson level, there's also guardrails here. So these are all learning objects within each of the lessons, and the student will gradually release into each of these learning objects as it's designed by our content team, our experts in curriculum. And I'm going to get to the accessibility part because that's something that's near and dear to my heart. And I think that if you're ever vetting a vendor, that's one thing that you should look at to take into consideration with your student population is what accessibility features do they need. Our system, we utilize text-to-speech. So anytime that a student would need something read to them, they would be able to, and I don't know how well you're all going to hear this, but they can highlight anything that needs to be read to them. They can highlight the whole lesson to have it read to them. The other features that our system has is a translator. So anything that would need to be translated, we can translate that, which is a great feature. We have lots of different languages too. So show you a quick peek of our languages there. We also have dictionaries. So if they want a dictionary, something, a term to be explained to them, we have that as well. So this is our commercial grade system. One of the other things I can show you is also like Zoom and things like that, just some standard accessibility features that our system has.
All right. Okay, so do we show everything you want to show? Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to take back the screen. I think those are 2 really good things, but here's what I'm thinking now that I'm coming back to all my panelists on, is that here's the difference that at least Learning Council from a research institute sees between the before pandemic and the forced digital world we're in now that no one's probably going to ever give up. And that is the commercial world and the situation schools and districts are in right now is advanced logistics. In order to truly personalize, if you're going to do it on your own and not use a commercial grade system, then you're in a situation where you can't have lessons on the fly only. You have to have leadership from a teacher perspective of sharing what they're going to do further in advance. So you can't just throw things together on a weekend and then have your lesson the next week. That is one of the fundamental shifts, leaving the analog to the digital world. Because like all of you talked about, you got to have approvals to use that. What are you doing? That app's not approved. What happens? And in order to give student agency, you pretty much have to think with, I got my core lesson, Bill, but now I need it to branch in 16 directions for the kid that has a hearing problem, for the one that has to have it translated to Spanish, for the one that has this, da, da, da. And here's my branches for if they don't understand what a denominator is, I got this additional material over here on fractions, just in case that gets missed, I can shove the kid over to that stuff. That's personalization, right? It's done automatically in professional grade stuff, but if a teacher's going to build this whole lesson, she has or he has to do it way earlier. So that is a primary shift that we should probably actually add as something that you actually have a responsibility to do now, is advanced logistics in lesson sequences are now almost universally expected way earlier than they used to be. Not that you can't be a little bit on the fly, right? But in order to really do those two things, have everything improved, and two, actually do real personalization, that's not, everybody's in the whole group, there's no branches off into little weird directions for the kids who aren't getting it. You have to do it earlier. Okay, so let's talk about that. Dr. Phipps, why don't you go first on that? Because I think that's a sea change.
It is, and we're not there. I think our teachers are still in survival mode, trying to get through whatever they're immediately dealing with. I would say the only time they've had a chance to really plan like that has been during the summer, to think about what was coming up at the beginning of the year. We need to have more planning time that's intentional. We need to have some outcomes in terms of how that time is spent as well, but we're not there yet.
Okay, but are you kind of seeing what I'm saying? Is that those approvals for things and those abilities to personalize is going to force that?
Yes, it absolutely is.
What I like about pushing that, though, as a leader, is that what you're not saying is I'm replacing you with something else. Like I'm going to do all your content for you only. Like you might want to do that for quite a few courses or certain subjects with the professional grade stuff, but you would have an insurrection on your hand if you try to replace everything, right? But if you led with a game changer of let's just be prepared, let's be farther out. You should always be 4 weeks out or something like that. That might be doable by people. Like you said, over the summer they did it. Yeah. Anything else you want to say on that? Because I just kind of like went in a different direction.
No, I'm good.
Okay, good. All right. So let's go to Jeramie next.
Sure. So a couple things is one, I think the last 18 months, teachers have been in survival mode. So they may have known those best practices of let's plan ahead of time, but they, kind of got lost a little bit. So I think we're going to see a return to at least normal, to where, people are planning again and planning ahead of time and trying to do things. I'd say we are pushing that. We have Canvas. So we've been exploring mastery paths, which is where teachers can organize the learning based on personalization. You score this amount on this quiz, and you do this assignment versus this assignment. So we have some teachers biting for that and ready for that, but we still have a lot of teachers that are, what am I doing next hour? So apart from the district lens is to know that that's reality, to understand right now that that's reality, and then just coach our teachers up to where we are getting ahead and find some good examples that we can share with the others around PL to kind of get us more towards personalization and being a few weeks out and really being able to that. Since we are on our own, we don't have software that will do that for us. I don't foresee us purchasing a lot of that software. But as I said earlier, as we start looking at our curriculum resources and vetting those are some things we probably will be looking for, is some learning paths that are kind of embedded within those resources. So it's definitely, I think, for a lot of districts, something they're going to start looking at that they haven't necessarily had to in the past.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah, it's been a rough year. Lindsey.
I think one of the natural instincts of a teacher is to kind of take on more and do more. And I think one of our goals potentially is really helping them prioritize their standards and really determining if the digital tool they're using for instruction or for assessment is really making them more efficient, or effective. And if it's not a tool that they need to use in that particular moment. Really starting with that learning outcome. What's their strategy they're using? And if the tool doesn't make them more efficient or effective, then perhaps that lesson or that activity doesn't need it. And I think helping them navigate that kind of choice and lesson planning allows them to focus on the things that should be focused on and give up or allow more time for the more important things.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, Joe.
Yeah, I think we're in a, it sounds like we're all in a similar boat where, we have some teachers that could probably jump in, run with it. But then we do have those teachers who, they're still struggling for planning for tomorrow, let alone 4 weeks out. So I think that would probably be our biggest hurdle. As far as, teachers taking time to research and find the resources they'd be using, I think we could take a lot of that off their plate. I would see that as kind of being, we vetted these resources, we put that out there as a kind of curated list of things they could choose from. But just the intentional planning, for that personalized learning, whatever pathway those students might be going down, I do see that being a significant hurdle, even once we get them to the point structurally where they can even do it, just maintaining that always, future thinking momentum could be difficult.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah, it's the condition that we're in. I mean, the pandemic forced us to go faster ideologically in new ways. But there's still a long ways to go. All right, so these next couple I'm going to sort of squish together. Number 6, well, we talked about that already. Knowledge object takes advantage of a multiplicity of user design elements. That just means in terms of the user interface, user experience, it's using things that are appropriate to the student. Like you'll notice apps for 5 and 6 and 7 years old have really fat buttons because their coordination isn't as good, right? And they have, when they poke the iPad or whatever, it has to be a large, bright colored button, right? If you do that with the older kids, they think you're crazy because you're treating them like a child, right? So there's things about user interface, user experience that are interesting. So, and inappropriate tools. So Zach, you told me a story a while ago. Do you want to unmute and tell me the story about what happened with your child this last year?
My child was a first grader last year during the pandemic, and they used Google Classrooms, and navigating that system with a first grader was very challenging. The interface, it wasn't linear for him. He would be constantly asking me, and then navigating all the passwords that I had to keep. I had to, what is he logging in for this class, and what is he logging into for that class? It was a hot mess, and for a first grader, it was very difficult. Some of the apps did a very good job, but Google Classroom was very difficult for him to navigate. And I was in his classroom, which was his bedroom right next to me, many times helping him navigate that system. So.
I think that's one of the reasons why we're hearing a lot of school districts using Seesaw for their younger grade LMSs. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, so, okay, so moving right along. So the knowledge object is well considered to the completeness of the knowledge cover. I'm on 9, back on 8, it was, does it cause learning? Number 10, knowledge object is well considered. Number 12, actually, let me go all the way to number 12. It's considered for its rigor and relevancy. So I know, Zach, I wanted to have you show something. I don't think we have enough time to do that right now, but I want to have us just do a final round of comments on the depth of consideration in that, yes, it's actually doing something versus what you were just talking about, Lindsey, which is teacher as source of everything versus releasing it to the object. That is huge right now. It's a pivot point in going to digital. Is the object doing the purveying of the knowledge, or am I doing all of it? That's the issue right now. All right, so coming back to you on that first, Lindsey.
One thing we talk a lot about with our teachers is if, like with asking your students questions, if you don't plan for it, it's not going to happen. And so when we're looking at rigor and relevance and looking at the 4 quadrants of the types of questions to be asking, if you're not planning for those higher level questions, you aren't going to be asking those questions. And so it kind of goes back to what we talked about before with the PLC and the intentional planning, and looking at the data to be able to determine the students that are ready for those higher level questions, and that Bloom's taxonomy to make sure that you are meeting your students where they're at.
Right. Excellent comment. Okay, so I want to come back to Dawn and Jeramie and Joe, but I'm going to pivot over to Wendy first. Wendy, your comments on this point.
Okay, well, I'm a Lindsey fan. Lindsey said a few things that I just want to echo about teachers, and even just then with Bloom's, and I'll echo that with Webb's too. The big thing for me, though, is teachers aren't curriculum designers, and they haven't been taught to be curriculum designers, especially not in digital. And LeiLani, when I go back to the advanced logistics model, that's what we're asking them to do. And we're asking them to think in a three-dimensional model like an engineer. And we need them to be facilitators. And so that's where we've got to train them. We've got to get that training in if we're not providing them software as a service in those commercial grade models. So that being said, yes, we need them to focus on that objective and the learning target so they can figure out what they need to be doing to get to that high level of rigor to make sure that they're at the right level of Bloom's or Webb's. But I don't think we can ask them to be an engineer and think in those three-dimensional ways without the right levels of training. And that's what scares me. And I'm wondering, are we putting all this pressure on teachers and they're going to leave the field because we're not providing them either with A, the right resources, or B, the right training? And that's why, Joe, you said there are significant hurdles, and they're going to continue to be there. So it sounds a little negative, and I don't mean for it to. I just want to make sure that we're providing teachers with what they need.
Exactly. All right, Dawn, what are your thoughts on that? Just keying off of what Wendy said.
I agree with Wendy. I think it's almost a skill set. It's certainly a different lens and a perspective that a teacher has to have. Some may be closer to it than others, but I think it has to be modeled by administrators and modeled by instructional coaches and individuals. And you have to have your hand held and I think work through that. And when you realize what you're looking at and looking for, it becomes more ingrained in what an individual can do. But it's not something that's just going to happen because we put it on page.
Yeah, this is where you're leading, and all the administrators need to lead. Okay, so coming back to Jeramie, I missed you last.
Okay, I don't have a lot to add after Lindsey and Wendy there, with their nuggets of wisdom. One thing I would add, though, is that's where positions like mine, Lindsey's, and Joe's in districts are really important. And I think the value of these jobs are becoming more evident. A lot of districts are hiring tech specialists or blended learning specialists to really work with teachers, but also normalizing the coaching cycles. It's okay for teachers not to have that skill set, but there are people there that can help scaffold that.
Yeah.
But none of it's going to work unless you have a really solid plan from the district level of how you want that to look or how you want that to go and utilize those resources. We can, if you're really unorganized, you might throw 300 tools at a teacher and hope they can figure out what's the best one to use and when. When Lindsey was saying, you have to trust that teacher as the expert and kind of help coach them into, we don't need to use tech for tech's sake. We need to really make sure that we're diving into technology as an extension of the learning. So I think, that's really all I have to add there.
Good comments. All right, so wrapping us all up, Joe.
Yeah, well, I think I heard in there the question too was, what's the source of this instruction? Is it coming from software? Is it coming from teachers? I mean, just in my experience, it has to come from teachers. I mean, there is no replacement, as automated or as learning we might think some of these programs are at the end of the day. So it comes back to the teacher, especially if you're talking about keeping it rigorous, keeping it relevant. But as everybody said, and I said originally too, I think we have a long ways to go with our teacher training to get them to that point. I'm going to use the term again. I think we are at a sea change where, perhaps as we keep on going down this road, I mean, it's just a matter of hiring people that are right for that position where you are the instructor, but you also are the curriculum designer at the end of the day. You are doing that engineer type of thinking to get those lessons to your students. And it might just be a necessity of the profession at some point.
Yeah, excellent comment. All right, this has been a great hour, and I can't wait to get this out to our whole national audience, so they really hear the conversation about these digital learning experience standards now making their way into administrations nationwide. And thank you guys for contributing, each and every one of you. Thank you, Dr. Phillips, or Phipps. I keep saying Phillips. Sorry about that. Dr. Phipps, thank you so much. And thank you, Jeramie Davis and Lindsey Hallett and Joe Jarrett. Thank you guys. And Wendy and Zach, thanks for being with us. Let me just switch screens here really quick, tell you what's up next on the docket here. Our next plan here is to talk about, let me see, let's just click the right thing. Here we go. Then I'll let you guys go. The next event this Thursday is on these standards, but with attention towards the crafting of digital pathways, a new discipline in the market. We're seeing schools talk about this a lot. I hope you join us. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. See you later. Bye, Dr. Phipps.
Take care. Thank you.
Yeah, bye, Jeramie. Bye, Lindsey. Bye, Joe. Bye, Wendy. Bye, Zach. Bye, everyone.